News, thank you for starting your day with us. You're watching Europe Today, our EU Summit special coverage. I'm Maeve McMahon. It is Wednesday, the 19th of March, and you're live with us here on Euronews. You're watching our special show. It is called Europe Today, and we're focusing on the ingredients that EU heads of state and government will be chewing over at an EU summit taking place right here in Brussels tomorrow, Thursday. From Ukraine to defence to migration to the economy, there are plenty of topics that they'll have to discuss, and the mood in the room could be grim. The stories that we're across today here on Euronews. First, that phone call that took place yesterday between Putin and Trump. It lasted just over 1.5 hours. We saw Vladimir Putin agree to a partial ceasefire under Russia's agreement. We'll get the reaction from EU capitals. And Kaja Kallas, that's the EU Foreign Affairs Chief, she'll be live with us here in our studio telling us her plan to support Ukraine. She spent her day yesterday in London with her counterparts there, making sure that whatever happens to Ukraine, the EU will be there the whole way. And in economic news, a top European banker has told Euronews what is at stake if President Trump goes ahead and makes good with his tariffs plans.
Were there to be a 25% tariff on all of those goods, that could actually tip the Eurozone into recession.
We'll get back to that story in just a little while. We also have a business brief for you with our editor, Angela Barnes. But now, it is time to go back to our top story, and that is the phone call that took place yesterday between Trump and Putin. As I said, it lasted some 90 minutes, and it was rather underwhelming. Our reporter, Sasha Vacaluni, has been looking into the details.
That was the most anticipated phone call in the world. Moscow had 1 week to respond to a 30-day ceasefire proposal by Washington, which Ukraine had agreed upon. What's missing in this crucial moment, which can help put an end to the largest and the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II, is Europe itself. The EU has not participated in the talks, which can put an end to the war at its own borders. And that was a mistake, says Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belgium.
We need to be involved in the process. It is not yet the case, and we think that it's certainly a mistake. It's not the role of President Trump representing the interests of Europe. And Europe should be at the around the table with its own representatives. I emphasize the key role that Kaja Kallas, the High Representative for the foreign policy of Europe, is playing.
On top of getting its seat at the table, the EU is facing a challenge of getting all members agree first among themselves.
Hogy az amerikaiak célja a béke. És az amerikaiak a békéről tárgyalnak az oroszokkal. Brüsszel meg a háború folytatását akarja. Tehát, hogy a háború folytatását akaró entitásokat, országokat, szervezeteket oda hívnának a békéről szóló tárgyalásokra, ez kétlem.
Sasha Vacalini reporting for us there. And of course, that topic of Ukraine will clearly be dominating the EU summit taking place tomorrow in Brussels. President Zelensky of Ukraine will be joining the meeting virtually. And the feeling in the room will be similar to the one we heard in that package, alluded there to by the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, that the Europeans are clearly not around the table, and Kaja Kallas perhaps could have a voice here. Well, the EU Foreign Chief is in fact our guest today, live with us here on Euronews, on Europe Today, so we're thrilled that you're here with us. Thank you so much for making the time. It's been a busy week. You were in London yesterday, as I mentioned earlier. But first, let's talk about that phone call, that high-stakes phone call between Trump and Putin. What is your reaction to this partial ceasefire that they brokered?
Well, first of all, it's good that they had this call, because the conditions that Ukrainians agreed to were there, and everybody wanted to listen what also Russia has to say. Of course, we have two different pictures. One that is given by the United States, what was discussed, and the other one what is given by Russia, what was discussed. So I think it's really good to see how these things are going. I mean, President Trump was very clear. The aid to Ukraine was not discussed, but President Putin said that it was discussed. So I rather believe President Trump in this.
Even though, do you trust President Trump? Because he seems to like Putin a little bit more than he likes the EU and Brussels.
Well, they have the talks, and what I want to say is that this is the shuttle diplomacy right now. I mean, there is no negotiation table yet, but the really trying to get the picture where the parties are. Does Russia really want peace? I mean, if they wanted to show goodwill, they could have started with giving back the Ukrainian children that have been deported to Russia, releasing prisoners of war. They didn't, but of course ceasefire regarding the energy infrastructure is also welcomed by Ukraine.
Even though the Europeans are clearly not around the table in these talks, the EU's been completely sidelined here.
No, that is not true. I mean, there is no table where Russia and Ukraine are sitting right now. It's a shuttle diplomacy. I mean, U.S. is talking to Europeans, U.S. is talking to the Russians, U.S. is talking to the Ukrainians. Of course, any deal to really work, you need the Europeans to be around the table and agree to the deal, because the implementation of the deal has to be in the hands of Europe.
And for that, you need the phone line to work between Brussels and DC. And you need not to be snubbed when you go to DC and you think that you might be meeting Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, but he doesn't have time. This is a problem.
Well, we had the G7 meeting last week, where we had plenty of opportunities to talk about different issues, also with Marco Rubio. So I don't see any wedge there. And of course, Russia really wants to see US and Europe divided, because then they are much stronger. If we are divided, let's not give them that.
And you're presenting a feeler paper today on how to support Ukraine in defence. Is this your way of kind of preparing the continent for war?
Well, we have to prepare so that we would, be able to deter this happening. I think the strongest we are, or the stronger we are, the less likely the war is. There is, this conflict there. We need to do more for our defense. We have been discussing this for a long time. We also need to do more for Ukraine, so that, the stronger they are on the battlefield, the stronger they are behind the negotiation table, and they must be strong enough to be able to say no to a bad deal.
But what's the price you would pay for the ceasefire? Would you stop sending weapons to Ukraine?
That is not very wise, because in order for the ceasefire to work, there has to be really deterrence. And if the old guards are down, I mean, Putin has showed this before. He's not keeping to the ceasefires, and if he wants the guards to be down on Ukrainian side, then he actually achieves what we want. And I'm absolutely certain that he will continue. Putin is investing more than 9% of his GDP on military. He will want to use it again unless we are very strong and united on our side, and making all the steps necessary that it would be too costly for him to take up this war.
OK, we'll see what happens at that EU summit tomorrow. And also with Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State is in town in a couple of weeks, in early April, for that NATO summit. But for now, Kaja Kallas, thank you so much for being our guest today. We'll see you very soon, hopefully, on Euronews.
Thank you.
And of course, at EU summits, they're busy. They're very busy for heads of state and government. They have long dinners, long desserts, and also there's lots of journalists, over 1,000, waiting to get some news. And on that point, we were taking a look at who's up and who's down right now when it comes to the leaders sitting at the EU Council table. You can take a look at this report brought to you by Vincenzo Genovese and Shandor Giros.
Popularity is key for politicians, and domestic approval matters at EU summits too. Leaders often leverage their standing at home in tough all-night negotiations. So who's riding high in the popularity stakes right now? According to Morning Consult's latest global approval ratings from March, leading the popularity pack are Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and her Polish counterpart, Donald Tusk. Close behind is another right-wing newbie. Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof took office last July and enjoys a 39% approval rating. Sweden's Ulf Kristersson and Spain's Pedro Sanchez follow up with 34% approval. On the flop side, outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is scraping the bottom with just 21% approval. French President Emmanuel Macron faces steeper challenges with just 19% approval, though that's not stopped him putting himself out front on Europe's response to Ukraine and relations with Donald Trump. The lowest-ranked EU leader is Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala, with only 16% approval. With Czech elections approaching later this year, right-wing rival Andrej Babiš is waiting in the wings.
And you can read more about upcoming EU elections and political musical chairs on Euronews.com or download our app. But now, as promised, it is time for our business brief. Our business editor, Angela Barnes, is in the studio. Over to you, Angela.
Thanks very much, Maeve, and good morning. Well, in business news today, the CEO of Barclays Europe says investors are concerned about what current trade disruptions may do to the economy. That's in Europe and the US. Well, speaking exclusively to Euronews, Francesco Ciccato emphasised that while fiscal initiatives in Europe may provide some relief, such as Germany loosening its debt brake, caution should be maintained.
The euro area has roughly 480 billion euros of goods exports to the US. Now, at the moment, the latest models that our research team have looked at are relatively mild in terms of the tariff assumption that's being made. But were there to be a 25% tariff on all of those goods, that could actually tip the Eurozone into recession.
Well, in other business news, all eyes are on the Federal Reserve today, with the central bank scheduled to deliver its second interest rate decision of the year. Well, markets are expecting the Fed to keep rates steady. Well, earlier I spoke to Krishna Guha, who's the vice chairman of Evercore ISI, about how the rate outcome could impact the European Central Bank's monetary policy path.
The ECB is certainly looking very closely at the US economy, both in terms of what's happening to US growth and in terms of what's happening to Fed rate policy. Of course, the bigger influence on the ECB right now, though, is coming from the Trump administration itself, ahead of the possible announcement of further reciprocal tariffs in April.
Well, for more business, economy and markets news, head over to the Euronews website. Maeve, back to you.
We certainly will. Angela Barnes, our business editor, thank you so much for that live update. You mentioned, of course, the European Central Bank. Well, its president, Christine Lagarde, will be here in Brussels. She'll be sitting down with EU leaders tomorrow, telling them what exactly is at stake and if a recession is really coming. But other news taking place in Brussels today, of course, the mantra is make Europe competitive again. You might have seen steel workers out on the streets of Europe over the last couple of months. Well, today, the European Commissioner, Stefan Sejourne, has a plan up his sleeve. He's trying to save the industry, make it competitive again. And are you good at saving money? I'm terrible. Well, the EU is trying to help us out here. Later today, they'll be presenting a savings plan. It's linked, of course, to their capital union markets. It's a way to rally money and make sure people stay in the European Union, do business here, and not flee to somewhere else. Well, that brings today's edition of Europe Today to an end. Keep an eye out for our newsletter and keep an eye out for Euronews.com for all the stories we've been covering today. As I mentioned earlier, that summit is taking place tomorrow. We'll be live with you once more, bringing you all the details. We have special guests and exclusive interviews. See you tomorrow. Take care.
What can the EU do for its citizens? In European